All right. Hi,
Okay.
everyone. Welcome. I am Dr. Irina Levin. This is Dr. Laurie Stoff, and I believe Dr. Stoff is going to get us started for today's session, Fulbright Friday, Conceiving a Study Research Project, Part 2.
Yes, welcome. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Uh, we are here today to discuss the second part of a series that we began earlier regarding the ways in which you want to go about constructing your conceiving or your study research project. And we are now joined by our colleague, Dr. Mitch Habza, who is our graduate senior program manager for graduate awards. Did I get that right? Okay.
It's
It's a lot of things in the title.
Senior Program Manager of Distinguished Graduate Fellowships. It's like naming the seven dwarfs, but yeah, that's
Great. And then Dr. Levin introduced herself already. She's one of our faculty mentors. I'm Dr. Stoff. I'm also one of the faculty mentors. And yes, so hopefully why you're here is you want to learn why and how to go about creating a successful Fulbright statement of grant purpose that is going to secure this award for you. So we're going to kind of go through the basics of that, and then we're going to dig a little bit deeper and give you some examples of some successful proposals that demonstrate the kinds of things that we like to see in these awards. And then Dr. Habza, who is our resident writing expert, is going to really give you some important writing advice as we really want to get you started on that writing process before we break for the summer. And we want you to be able to use that time over the summer to get your statement of grant purpose worked on, and in the stages that we're by the time we get back in the fall, you'll just be doing some cleanup and revision because it is a pretty intense process. There's a lot of moving parts, and we just want to make sure you don't lose that time over the summer. Okay, so as I said before, this webinar is focused specifically on the Study Research Award. And these are awards that are given to folks who are designing their own independent research projects. You will be working with folks at other institutions or entities in the countries that you're proposing to go and work, but really you're designing your own project. And this gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility, but it also needs to fit the parameters of the Fulbright. So we want to make sure we cover those and make sure you're hitting all of those in your statement of grant purpose. One of the things that is really important to note is they've made a slight change this year from indicating a word count to or a page count now to a character count. This is sometimes a little bit difficult for students to figure out. What does it mean, 6,000 characters? Well, that's approximately 1,000 words. It really will usually work out to be about 2 pages, single spaced. And we do want to remind you that you should use all the space that's available to you. The purpose of the statement of grant purpose is to demonstrate to the Fulbright Commission that you know exactly what you're doing, who you're going to be doing it with, when you're going to be doing it, where you're going to be doing it, and how you will specifically carry out that research. And so we're going to kind of walk you through those aspects of how to best demonstrate that to Fulbright. But also really importantly, because this is Fulbright and because Fulbright's main mission is to promote mutual cultural understanding between the United States and the country that you will be hosted in, you need to demonstrate that you have a very clear commitment to that host country, to the community in which you will be embedded while you do your research, and that you will be carrying out something of a cultural ambassadorial role where you're promoting that mutual cultural exchange, where you're sharing aspects of your version of American culture and learning about the culture in which you are living. And that is really, really crucial For a lot of humanities and social science projects, this is somewhat obvious, right? If you're going there to study a group of people who live in a certain country, then it becomes pretty easy to demonstrate that you're engaging in this kind of mutual cultural exchange. For more hard science type projects, that might be a little bit more difficult. So it is something we really want you to start thinking about. What kinds of activities, what kinds of projects can you undertake that will fulfill this criteria for Fulbright? One of the really important questions that will be asked by those folks who will be reviewing your application is the validity of your project. Is this something that is possible to do? And is it something worth doing, right? So to answer that key question, you want to think about who you're going to work with, in particular, why that person or those people are the best people for you to work with. Are they the ones doing the cutting edge research in the field? Are they well poised to be able to give you access to things you wouldn't normally have access to here in the US? Are they folks who are willing to work with you, which is important for this type of grant, that you get a letter of affiliation from those people saying they would like to work with you. They will welcome you into whatever setting, their lab, their research group, or will just be willing to help direct your research. So that's vitally important. To get that affiliation, it often takes a lot of time. So we do recommend that you start that process now. Start with reaching out to your faculty members here at ASU that you're working with, see if they have connections with folks in the country that you want to go to, and then work out from there. Cold emails are also okay. So think about who it is that you want to work with. What do you propose to do is vitally important, right? You need to outline that very specifically. And in particular, why is it important? Why is it innovative? What will it contribute to the field? Remember that as a researcher, you're in a conversation with other scholars. So what are you doing to contribute to that conversation? Are you building on things that other folks have already done? Are you working to maybe dispute something that someone has done and you think there's something better, a better way to go about researching? Are you looking at something entirely new? Are you filling a gap that has yet to be researched? So those are important things for you to think about. You also want to be able to detail your specific research goals. Your research questions, right, should be clearly defined in that proposal, and what methodologies you will be using. How are you going to go about getting the answers to the research questions that you have posed? Why is the project significant on a larger scale? Yes, for research purposes, perhaps in your narrow field, it might fill a niche that's been untapped, but you're writing for an audience of what we would call educated non-specialists, so people who are not necessarily in your field, and you need to be able to justify to them that this is important on a larger scale. What will it do for the world at large to know more about this particular research topic that you're working on? And then again, as I emphasized earlier, how will your project contribute to the Fulbright mission of promoting mutual cultural exchange and understanding? And so thinking about that is critical for a successful SOGP. The other thing that they're really going to be looking carefully at is whether or not it's feasible for you to carry out this project. Is the place that you've proposed somewhere that you really need to be? In other words, could this research be done just sitting at home and using internet resources or Zoom or other kinds of electronic resources, or just going to your local library? Why do you really need to be physically in the location that you are proposing? That is vitally important. And is it possible for you to carry out the kind of research that you're proposing in that place? In other words, Will you have access to the things that you need? Will people be willing to talk to you? Do you have the language skills in order to be able to engage in research in a country where they may not speak English? When will you carry out the project? What's your timeline? At what stage will you do what? Are there things that need to happen in a certain sequential order? Will you have access to those things at the times that you need to have access to them? How long is it going to take you to fulfill each phase of the research project? All of those things need to be clearly laid out. Why is this something you want to do? Thinking about this as a way for you to demonstrate this is the logical next step for you. This is, again, necessary for you in order to achieve your academic, professional, or personal goals, and how it will lead you into the next phase of your life, how it's a good stepping stone into those things. Are you qualified for carrying out this project? Do you have the coursework necessary? Have you learned the methodologies? Have you practiced this form of research before? Have you done the literature review? These are all things, again, that you need to demonstrate in terms of your qualification. What is, again, the most compelling reason for you to be in the country that you say that you're going to? Like, why, again, is it you need to be on the ground there? And then, again, as I said, how it will help develop your further academic and professional goals. What is the next thing? So thinking about this sort of as a trajectory is really important. And then in terms of thinking about that feasibility, you do want to think very deeply about the context. This is really critical to Fulbright. What is going on in the place that you're proposing to do the research that may or may not impact your research, right? The culture, the politics, right? Are there certain social mores that you have to be very careful about if you're doing research on areas that might be sensitive in that culture? Is there political volatility in the place that may affect your access to things? Maybe people don't want you to be looking at certain kinds of documents or engaging with certain groups of people. You need to think very carefully about that. This is also why it's really important for you to have a strong affiliation, to demonstrate that there'll be someone there in the country who's going to help guide you, who's going to help you when you are faced with challenges, when obstacles arise in terms of carrying out your research, and can guide you not only disciplinarily, not only in terms of the research field, but also sort of navigate the circumstances of the particular location. Again, you really want to focus on that preparation, your academic as well as your practical experiences that demonstrate that you can carry out this research. But not just that, again, thinking about this in terms of Fulbright, are you the type of person who is culturally adaptable and sensitive and flexible and willing to kind of, go with the punches and roll with the punches and be the type of open-minded individual that Fulbright is really looking for? Are you okay with being outside of your comfort zone in an entirely new cultural situation, maybe with an entirely different standard of living? Maybe you won't have access to the things that you're used to that make your life comfortable here in the US. Are you going to be okay with all of that? Are you willing to adapt and be flexible in those circumstances? And then again, the timing is really important. Can you carry out everything that you say that you're going to carry out within the time frame that you have allotted? Remember that most Fulbright awards are usually academic year long, so 9-10 months, maybe at the most 12 months. But if you're proposing something that's going to take you 3 years to accomplish, that's not going to be very useful for a Fulbright. So you want to think about maybe taking just a portion of that research and applying it to the Fulbright, and then finding another way to carry out the rest of the research. So we've been talking about the SOGP, or the Statement of Grant Purpose. That is probably the most important component of your Fulbright application, regardless of what type of award you're applying for, but particularly so for an independent research award, because this is where you're going to lay out to the Fulbright Commission what it is you're actually going to do and how you're going to do it. And we do suggest a kind of blueprint. Now, you don't have to stick exactly to this, but these are just some suggestions to give you structure. And structure is really important in effective writing, as I'm sure Dr. Habza is going to tell you all about. So obviously, I know this might come as a huge surprise. You should start with an introduction. However, you might write that last. So just think about that. It should come first eventually, but it might not be the first thing that you draft. It should include an overview of the host country, right? Why you need to go there, right? The compelling reason for you to be there, who you're going to be affiliated with, the research area, right? Make sure that that's very clear. The specific research questions you're seeking to answer, and kind of a preview of the things that are going to come later, your methodology and why it's important. You kind of want to hook the reader in, like bring them in by stating very early on why this is something important that should be funded. Then you want to kind of provide a background, a brief generalized discussion of what is already known, right? You're setting things up again to demonstrate where you fit in that scholarly conversation, and then an argument for why the research that you want to do will make a contribution to the existing work. A brief overview then of your methods, what procedures you will use, how you will go about getting the answers to those research questions, and again, why those are important questions to answer in order for you to fulfill this research project. You will also want to discuss in more detail the specifics of your host country affiliation, who those folks are, why you've chosen them. Again, are they the leaders in their field? Are they doing things that no one else is doing in terms of research? And how they're going to help you with the process of your own project. And think about why that's going to be beneficial to not just you and completing your project, but to the host country. This is really important to understand. This is not something where you want to present yourself as what we call a parachute researcher, someone who just drops down into the country, collects the information and does the research that they need, keeps it all to themselves, leaves, and then fulfills their own personal goals in terms of their own research agenda. The research you should be doing should somehow be demonstrative of a benefit to the country that you're going to be living in, something that you're giving back, right? You're not just doing this for yourself. You also want a timeline that kind of breaks things down step by step, again, telling them when you're going to do what, making it very clear that it's feasible for you to complete these tasks in the time that you are allotted by the Fulbright. So you want specific measurable goals for research for each of the methods you've said that you're going to employ, for how you're going to answer those research questions, and demonstrating how you'll complete each phase of that research. Then you'll obviously want to go into depth with regard to your qualifications, the things that you have done to prepare you, again, the coursework, the methodology, research that you've already carried out, the experiences that you've had, and again, what kinds of cultural competencies you need, particularly language if that's necessary. You should definitely speak to this in the SOGP. And then at the end, you should wrap up by demonstrating that this is something worthwhile, right? That there's something at stake with this research, that if it's not done, we will lose out on gaining some important insight or some important new information, and how this is going to benefit not just you, again, thinking about your timeline in terms of your trajectory in achieving your academic, professional, or personal goals, but also how the world at large, the host country, the United States, will benefit from your research. Okay, that was a lot. I'm going to take a pause for a second here, and then we're going to transition to some examples of some abstracts that folks have written, but I want to just see if there's any questions before we move on.
Okay. Well, if there's no questions, I do want to warn our student participants here that the next part is interactive. So we'll definitely need to hear from you. So at some point in your drafting, right, it can be helpful, and it depends on the person when it's helpful, right? So you might want to start, drafting, sketching things out on your own, but at some point you might want to use some of the resources on our Canvas page, specifically the, previous versions of SOGPs from other students who have applied to Fulbright, to look at how they incorporated all of these elements in their statement of grand purpose, right? It's not necessarily the case that these elements show up in the same order every time. They can be combined differently. During the drafting process, I've also worked with applicants who need help expanding certain parts of this. And I've also worked with applicants, these are usually PhD students who need help kind of what's the opposite of contracting, right? Like to, not spend, 2 pages on their methods, right? To really boil that down into a paragraph, to be able to do it without, the help of citations, without giving the entire history of whatever it is they're working on, but really focusing in on their methods in particular. So what we're going to look at in just a second are examples of abstracts. Now, to be clear, you would never want to write the abstract first, right? Because you want to have written the statement of grand purpose, and then based on that, right, you'll pull things and create an abstract. The reason we're looking at these abstracts is because they, in this format, they give us the ability to kind of see, okay, what does this look like boiled down to a, just a short abstracted version, but still contain some, still address some of those really important, areas that Dr. Stoff laid out in the earlier part of this presentation. So we're going to look at just a couple of them, starting with this one. This is an applicant who would be graduating with their bachelor's degree, looking to do a neuroscience project in the Czech Republic. So here's what my questions are, and I'm going to also copy them into the chat so that you can read them at your leisure. But looking at this, what can you identify this applicant's research question? And what language are they using to signal that they're describing a particular area of inquiry, right? How do they present their research question and where it fits in, what field it fits into, what discipline it fits into? The next question is, what will they do? I think there's a little typo there when I put it in the chat, but what will they do to conduct the research? Do they describe any methods or potential outcomes in their abstract? What details do they include about the affiliates who are supporting their project? What choices does the applicant make when communicating their research to, again, a multilingual audience, right? Because it's going to, these successful applications get reviewed 2 times here in the US by a national screening committee and by the Fulbright Commission in the particular country. So what choices does the applicant make when communicating their research to a multilingual audience from a broad disciplinary and professional backgrounds? And how do they describe the importance of their research to their field, host country, or to the US? So I'm going to give you, just a couple of minutes to read through this, and then if you can unmute yourself and share what you noticed, then we'll proceed that way.
I guess I'll just start it off with
Okay, great.
the
Please do.
first question for the research question. So it's like in the middle of the paragraph, they say a successful project will determine if aluminum has an inhibitory effect on neuronal, I don't know how you pronounce that one, neuronal
You're
transport of
right.
APP. So the key words is, well, I saw if, so that was kind of like the beginning of the question or like the hypothesis, or the testing part of it, if that has an effect on the transport of ATP.
Great, thank you. One thing that I noticed is the description of the affiliate as a collaborative and engaging environment, right? And how this is vital to the success of the project. What else?
When they talk about communicating the research, they talk about using portraits to pair with beautiful rays of neurons taken from my research. So essentially, like using pictures to increase dialogue and understanding between the two cultures or languages.
Yeah, so this is like a really interesting blend of, something that, that maybe they're interested in, and we'll talk about more in the full statement of grand purpose, right? Portrait photography, but using that interest to both connect with the community, but connect with them by sort of enhancing their knowledge on human cognition and emotion. So it's really nicely tied into the research itself. Thank you, Khadija. Kavozia, do you anything that you noticed, or if Dr. Habza or Dr. Stoff or Dr. Mox want to jump in, you're also welcome to.
Yeah, I was also going to bring up the portrait photography because ironically, I'm a photographer, so I really love this abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And this summer, I'm planning to go to Costa Rica and do some field research, but I also like to bring my camera and try to connect with people in a different way because my Spanish is not the best.
Mm-hmm.
But this is interesting as it relates to neuroscience. I
Mm-hmm.
think it does add a different way to connect with people, but like the camera it humanizes the research they're doing as well. And it makes me curious about just a creative research project as far as Fulbright and how to move forward with that. I didn't want to like say the same thing as the last person, but yeah, that really stood out to me.
Okay, great. And I think that another part of the connection, right, and the importance of the research to, both the host country and the US, right, and also that Fulbright mission to, improve and enhance connections, right, is this expanded collaboration with the US and this research center, right? So there's a benefit, in both cases. And then I think maybe, it's obvious to say, right, where that it might feel obvious, but it's still important, right, that Alzheimer's disease and, a better understanding of it and ability to maybe, by understanding it, have better treatment options, have better outcomes for people. That this is looking at something that can be, it might be a common environmental factor that leads to Alzheimer's. And there's also a mention of the future career, right? So kind of looking at how the Fulbright year will fit into this person's career. So great. Thank you, Dr. Habza, Dr. Stoff, Dr. Mox. Anything that you want to add that we missed, even though these participants did a fantastic job?
Yeah, I think everyone's insights were great. I think one thing I'd just like to point out about this particular instance, and we can see it if we look at the full statement of grant purpose, but this applicant does a really good job of not using too much jargon, right? This is a complex, topic. It is something that would be very easy to lose a broad audience with, and I think this applicant does a really good job of using signal phrases. A successful project will determine. All right, so we know what the measurement is of a successful project by using that clear language. The purpose of this Fulbright study is to enhance. By using the language that kind of frames the information we're about to get, it makes complex scientific information much more easy to understand because we're understanding why we're being given that information rather than just getting an info dump of scientific information.
Thank you. Okay, we can move on to our next one here. So this is, related in the field of public health, and now we are looking at a proposal for Hungary. So yeah, take a minute or two to read through this, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts about, those same questions, what you notice. Okay, a lot of for non-Hungarian speakers, very intimidatingly spelled words, so don't worry about those. But what did you notice about this abstract? What is there any kind of way that it feels different from the other one? Those other questions, for instance, how does, again, this is a complex question. What choices does the applicant make to communicate it to this kind of varied audience? What did you see?
I'll just start off again with the research question. So I'm just going to go based off the sentence of what it says there, and then I'll rephrase it afterwards. Near towards the end there, I think it's the second to last sentence, it says, as a nationwide statistical survey of Roma health condition, this project is the first of its kind, aimed to not only document health outcomes, interventions, but also identify the specific indicators of better health to develop a nationwide health education, promotion, and insurance system. So basically they're just identifying like in the Roma health areas, where are we at here? Sorry, I'm trying to like read back at it. What are the health outcomes and interventions, and specific indicators of better health to develop a nationwide health education, promotion, insurance system.
Great. Yeah. And I think in that sentence, the things that really stand out to me, right? Again, when you're talking about, if we think back to that validity slide, right, is the first of its kind, right? That's very much identifying a gap. And also you see very clear indications of what the practical outcomes of this research will be, right? Because they're named here. So it will help, develop a system of nationwide education, promotion, and insurance. That addresses, that ostensibly addresses these things. So I think that there's a lot happening in this sentence, but it's still a easy to parse, relatively easy to understand sentence. What else?
I think this one was way more specific as far as who we're working with exactly and
Yes.
where at. So that is another thing that I remember when you guys were looking at going through the other questions about, who will you be working with, how, what resources will you have, and all of that. They seem to have a strong like affiliation in this country with the research they're doing.
Great. And I think actually there are multiple affiliations here, right? Because there's the
Right.
at the University of Debrecen, we're gonna say.
I
Um,
wasn't gonna try
and
to say it.
and then the Hungarian Health Outreach Program, the American Corner. American Corner is something that American embassies generally have where they welcome the local community, usually for like, English language exchange. They usually have a little library that goes along with it. So there is I think that you're totally on point to point out how much of the strength of the multiple affiliations are a big part of this particular abstract. What else?
It mentions like the goal that she has or that they have within the project. It said, I will create effective public health outreach programs that will help acknowledge and overcome disease, social determinants of health. And then it said in partnership with like a specific location.
Okay, great. Also a great point, right? So again, like the sort of smaller picture, bigger picture, right? Moving on to the development of this kind of nationwide program that looks at all the different things. Um, is there anything missing from this one that you were expecting to see, but maybe didn't quite get? I will just say that from my perspective, right? Like I get how this is great for Hungary, but there's not a, I mean, and I can sort of anticipate how this might be helpful for the US as well, because we have health disparities too. I don't know. I hope I'm not breaking any news to you guys, but we certainly have health disparities as well. That's not articulated here, but this is the abstract. So what I would say is that I would assume that in the actual complete statement of grant purpose that this applicant made those connections. And Dr. Hobbs can correct me if I'm wrong.
I think they do. It's been a little while since I've read the sample for this one.
Sure. Okay. Anything else that stood out to you or that you think is missing or anything else that you want to bring up about this one before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I would just say that I think for the purposes of the abstract, they were right to lean into the benefit to the country so that they really are demonstrating it's not parachute research, that what they're doing is actually going to be of great benefit, not just to themselves, but to the host country and to the community that they're serving. And so, yes, in the larger statement of grant purpose, it's good to always say how this is the logical next step in your personal trajectory, but to remember that, especially for the abstracts, which are largely the things that the in-country committees are going to pay the most attention to, that this is probably something that really caught their eye, right? And so they may not read the full statement of grant purpose as carefully as the National Screening Committee. So for the purposes of the abstract, I think this is that it hits the nail right on the head.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'll just move on to our last example now. And this is this applicant was a doctoral student in anthropology. So as an anthropologist, always happy to see an anthropology example for a study in Ecuador. So let's take a minute to read this one. Okay, we lost Cece, so we'll need one of our other participants to start us off this time around. What did you notice about this one, and what are the things that stood out to you in terms of how the research question is formulated, or the research plans conveyed, or the importance of Okay, thank you, Khadija. We understand you guys are on the move and doing your best, so thank you for being here, despite the fact that you're also on your way somewhere else. So what are the things that stood out? Kavozia, I guess, or one of my colleagues also feel free to weigh in. Um, okay, I'll get the ball rolling here. So one of the things that I think that this applicant does is talks about, you know, why should we care, right? So I think that, you know, by pointing out that this is really a something that is, you know, a large scale process, something that, you know, we're all sort of faced with, and that despite that, there is still a gap in the information that we have, right? The causes of this association are not understood. So this phenomenon is prevalent, it's serious, and it's not yet well understood. Again, that's creating that gap that this person is aiming to fill with their research.
Yeah, sorry, it takes me a second. So I like to
No,
read
no
it like
problem.
a few times to make sure I'm understanding what they say. But the last sentence is the closest that what I find to their research question. But
Hmm.
also the first sentence shows what they're trying to tackle. And then, like you said, the statistics they put like in the middle really do help to clarify why it's important and um, where's the gap in like, okay, why there is a gap, which is the fact that there is not really, we don't really understand the causes or what are we missing, you know? So
Hmm.
yeah, that's let me read it one more time.
Yeah. There's also this transition word ultimately, right? Which helps. It's, you know, it sort of signals to the reader. It's like, hey, I've told you a few things, but here I'm going to really kind of break it down and tell you, you know, what the takeaway is. Again, we also see, you know, a reference to the affiliation, that this is someone at a university in Ecuador, in Quito. Um, Anything else, folks? Okay, well, I think hopefully breaking these down, and you know, just identifying the way that someone makes, um, you know, this a reality, and then, you know, also kind of narrows it down to what they're going to focus on in their abstract. And the fact that the three of them, I think, were quite, you know, different, right? There's sort of different focuses in them. So hopefully that also tells you that there's not just one way of doing this, that you can have some creativity and also think about what is best for your particular project while having these kinds of, you know, guidelines, as Dr. Stoff said, remembering that, you know, for instance, that the in-country committee who's going to be reviewing it really, you know, might just read your abstract. So if that's the case, what do you want to make sure to include in it for them to see? So thank you for your participation and your attention to these. I'll now hand it over to Dr. Hobza. Talk about writing.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Levin. And Dr. Stoff, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to add anything to the previous activity?
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So the writing that we just looked at, that Dr. Levin just talked us through, that did not happen overnight, right? Those are not things that just happen when someone sat down to write for the first time. The writing process, really important to know that it's an investment and it's something that happens over a long period of time to put together an application that is able to clearly communicate the kinds of complex projects that these students are putting together for a competitive Fulbright application. But writing is more than just writing. It's not just sitting down in front of our screens and typing, right? There's a lot that you have to do before you start that part of the process, and there's a lot you have to do after you put something on the page. And so that words on the page are an outcome of a long process of thinking about what you're going to write, talking with us about how you're going to do that, talking with your faculty mentors about the kind of project that you want to create, talking with your affiliates about their participation in the project, but also conducting a lot of research in your field, research on the country, how everything fits together. And so what ends up being on the page is from that kind of ideation process. But also what ends up on the page at the end of it is not what's on the page at the start of it, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into these kinds of applications. So keep that in mind as you're looking at samples. Some of these abstracts over the summer, we're going to run simulations where we look at samples with applicants. And it's always just so important to know that those were not just written in a one and go kind of deal, right? These applicants have put a lot of work into these applications. And what I'm here to talk about today is how to break this up into stages so that you can be kind to yourself as a writer and be able to put in the amount of work that's needed to put together a strong application. And so we're going to talk about different steps of the writing process, which include revising, editing, and proofreading, not just drafting. All right, next slide, please. All right, so to get us started, I think what's most effective is to not approach any kind of writing task as, well, I'm just going to open up a blank Google Doc and see what I get done today. You might find that you don't get a lot done doing that, right? We have to actually kind of plan ahead and figure out what we're going to do next. So what is less helpful is just sitting down and being like, I'm just going to write a draft of my introduction today. But instead, set specific measurable goals that are appropriate for what you want to get done, right? So if you don't have an introduction done at all, what do you need to do, right? Do you need to outline your research questions first? Maybe that takes you 30 minutes to write down your research questions. Maybe instead of, if you already have a draft, do you need to revise something, right? So on the slide, there's some examples of what specific measurable goals are. 2 to 3 sentences explaining the background of the central problem to a layperson. That someone could take 30 minutes to try to do that. Collecting key statistics, so research, part of the writing process here. What kind of research statistics do you need to include in the introduction? Even though we don't need to cite sources, in those abstracts, you did see that some people were including statistics, right? So it's okay to say, according to the CDC, this is the scope of this kind of issue. Whereas we don't need to include like APA citations in these documents. Or you can also, focus on writing 3 to 4 sentences describing what has been done to try to solve that problem. Maybe you're writing a transition between the introduction and the background section. But by setting these specific measurable goals, you have an outcome that you're working towards. You have a time frame in which you're working within. So if you're just sitting down for a 1-hour writing session, a 2-hour writing session, you can plan it out and see what you want to get done. So then when you're done with that at the end, you can go, you know what, here's what I got done today, and here's what I need to continue doing tomorrow. Otherwise, when we just sit down and go, I'm just going to write and see what happens, we probably don't feel very satisfied after 2 to 3 hours of doing that, right? Because we did not start out with clear measurable goals. And so we can't measure our success at the end of that writing session. Next slide, please. And while you're setting these goals, important to keep in mind that there's different stages of the writing process and to know where you are in that writing process, right? So if you are in that brainstorming stage of like, I need to figure out what I'm doing, what sources I'm going to be interacting with that influence my thinking, even if I'm not setting them down on paper, that might be more important than sitting down and writing out what exact institution you're working with at the moment, right? So you want to take things in the order of the writing process, understand where you are before you start setting those goals. So brainstorming is just the ideation process, thinking through what you want to put down on paper. Drafting is actually sitting down and putting it down on paper. And these are often recursive processes. So brainstorming, drafting, and revising all work together, right? So you might be brainstorming your background section while also simultaneously drafting your method section and revising another section of the essay. So you can, if you go back to that previous slide where Dr. Stoff broke down all the stages of the statement of grant purpose, and we don't need to go back now, but if you go back and look at that after this presentation and then align that with these stages, you can start to make a really effective plan for how you're going to go about working on your SOGP. What stage are you at for each of those different sections? And as you start drafting, you'll be making new content. And that is something that we don't need to be perfected, right? Because you're going to be revising and editing later. So I often tell students, we don't expect the first draft to be perfect. That is not the expectation. We throw that out the window. And we don't want to approach this like a classroom assignment where it's like, okay, I'm writing my final paper. It's due in 24 hours. I'm never going to look at it or think about it again once I turn this in. That's not the kind of way that we want to approach this document, because we're not your teachers and we are not trying to give you an A on an assignment, right? And so instead, we are in a working relationship with each other. And so we work with you on those drafts, we read over them, we give you feedback to help you revise them later and help you edit them later. Also very important to keep in mind the distinction between revising and editing. This is something that I find writers often interchange if they're not thinking about it. And it can cause you to have more work if you're not being clear and purposeful about how you understand these two stages. So revising is big changes. So that is going to be, you know what, I needed to write this paragraph to get all these ideas down on paper, but actually the second paragraph is where the work really happens. So I'm just going to remove the first paragraph. That's kind of a revision, is getting rid of material, cutting out sentences that we no longer need, or making drastic revisions to sentences, big changes. So if we're remodeling a house, this is literally like knocking out a wall to build an open area dining room, right? And then with editing, these are very small changes. It's spell checking, making changes to commas, formatting the document. It is not useful to start editing before we have finalized our revisions, right? So again, to go back to our remodeling the house example, if we paint that wall and then knock it out a week later to build that open area, we've wasted our time painting that wall, right? So we want to do our small changes afterwards, after we've made all the big changes. So as you're making your plans, sitting down with each writing session, be purposeful in how you're setting those specific measurable goals, what you need to do for the specific document, and what stage of the writing process you're at for each of those parts of the document. One thing that we don't often talk about when talking about writing is that writing is hard. I think we can recognize that, right? But I study writing, and I will tell you, writing is hard. It is a challenging process. It's something that makes me kind of scratch my head and get frustrated when I sit down to do it. But one part of that frustration is that there's an emotional component that we don't often talk about, right? We can talk about the task itself. I can't find the time, I can't find the time to focus, or I'm really, really busy. But there's an emotional component to that also can hinder us if we're not acknowledging it, right? So if we are doubting ourselves, if we're afraid that maybe this isn't the best fit for me, or I don't really know how to describe this problem in my field, I don't know enough, right? I'm reading all these experts, and I'm not an expert. How can I make these kinds of claims about what needs to be studied in our field? Those kinds of feelings can cause doubts, and they can lead to things like procrastination, right? And so finding motivation when we are being doubtful, when we are maybe a little anxious about the application, or maybe there's something else going in our lives too, right? We have full emotional lives outside of a writing project, outside of something like an application like this. And so identifying that, recognizing that, making room for it, really, really crucial to also having successful writing sessions. So I'm about to share a resource in the chat. This is from when I used to work at the Purdue Writing Lab as a graduate student. We would run dissertation retreats, and we would encourage students to set goals in a goal-setting journal. So those specific measurable goals I just described, very similar to the kinds of goals that we would encourage students to write when they were working on big writing projects. But there's also in that journal an emotional component, like what am I feeling today and how can I set that aside before this session? And that can be really helpful for putting together that productive session. So it's setting those measurable goals, but also checking in with yourself. How do I feel today? And that can also help you set appropriate goals too. I'm not feeling that great today. I'm feeling a little crabby because I had a disagreement with my roommate. You know what else makes me crabby? Writing literature reviews. So maybe you don't need to do that today, right? So you can plan around your emotions, plan around where you are, and plan around where you are in the particular writing stage. These are all ways to have more effective writing sessions than just sitting down and seeing what happens. All right, one other way to be successful and to be as happy as this person on the slide, I like to think that she's maybe just gotten a round of feedback from us. This is how excited you'll be when you get some feedback on your application essays from us. There's other methods to stay productive as well, in addition to planning purposeful sessions. And so there's a couple of different methods you can use. Some are time-based. So what I just described, sitting down for an hour, 2 hours, planning that out, that's a time-based method. It's being really intentional about how you're using your time. There's also a method called the Pomodoro method, where it's like, okay, for 15 minutes, I'm going to do this, 15 minutes, I'm going to do this, then for 5 minutes, I'm going to take a break. So you can plan out your breaks. So you might want to look into something like the Pomodoro method if you're really driven by time, if that's how you like to stay organized. Some app writers really are social-based. They really thrive in talking to other people about their work. So one way you can be focus more on that, if that works for you, is to start writing groups. You can also drop in at our drop-in hours over the summer, meet with us. If you really like to talk about your work, we're always happy to talk about your work with you. So if you are someone who's motivated by interacting with others, we have many ways to do that for our applicants. And so that's something to consider as well. What motivates you? And if that's interacting with others, the social-based methods could be really useful. Output-based methods, these are giving yourself awards, right? So I often give myself awards for getting little tasks done. When I was working on my dissertation, I paid myself $1 a page, very low wages. But as you're working on your Fulbright application, make some bigger goals for yourself. All right, next week, I'm going to submit my statement of grant purpose to an advisor. And once I do that, I'm going to take myself to the movies. Do something that you normally wouldn't do. Don't just give yourself a coffee, because maybe that's not a big reward, right? Unless if you never give yourself a coffee, but give yourself something you might not quite always give to yourself. So that way it's a goal you can work towards. In the link that I shared, there should also be a resource for those kinds of methods with more examples of that. So some students find it effective to kind of work towards a larger goal of, I'm going to buy myself this really nice book if I get 10 stickers in my book. So every time I complete one of my goals, I get a sticker, and then you can kind of measure out towards those bigger goals. So we encourage you to mix and match these, see what works for you. Same thing with the goal setting. You're in a constant process of calibrating who you are as a writer. You might find out you work better on certain tasks in the morning rather than the evening. And in that journal that I shared, you can keep track of those kinds of patterns and habits. And the more you learn about yourself as a writer, through reflection, through observation, the better you'll be as you continue to work through the process. All right, so this is our application timeline. So you'll see that we're already taking our intake appointments. We're working with students on drafting and revising through April and August. So this summer is the ideal time to work on the application, because fall passes by very quickly. So we encourage our applicants to be meeting with us. If you haven't already started your intake appointment, make your intake appointment, get the process started. And if you are starting to think about the writing process, you can meet with us for a brainstorming session. That's our step 2 of our appointments, and drafting sessions for us to work through those materials with you. And they do not need to be perfect, and they do not need to be complete. They just need to be substantial enough for us to have a conversation with you about them, and for us to keep making progress with you as we work with you on those. So we encourage our applicants to work with us over the summer. We have workshops, advising sessions. We'll have simulations where we look at essays together. So there's going to be a lot of content for you to work with us this summer. So pay attention to our emails, our bulletins, the Canvas courses, so that you can find out how to best benefit from the programming we're offering over the summer. And then after summer's over, we will briefly keep working through them in August. In September 9th, that is our dress rehearsal deadline. We want to have these applications as close to finished as possible, as polished as possible, so that they go off to our campus reviewers who read through everything. And then you'll meet with those reviewers on September 19th. They will ask you questions about your application, and they will give you feedback on what they think can be revised. And after that, you'll be working with us on your final revisions for the October 8th deadline. Is it October 8th or October 7th for the national deadline? We don't have
I
that
believe
on the
it's the 7th.
It's the 7th this year?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah,
Stoff.
sorry, it looks like we didn't update that. Apologies.
All right. So I think, planning around this timeline, really crucial. And so the steps and processes that we gave you today can help you put together those sessions, because we do this step by step, page by page, word by word. It's not something that we do overnight. It's not a one and done deal. So the most intentional planning you can do can help you be a successful and competitive applicant.
It's also, I think, thinking, we noticed, and especially in that second abstract, all of those great affiliations. So this is like right now is a great time to start making those contacts or activating contacts that you already have. So that when it comes to dress rehearsal time, that those that letter of affiliation and your ideas about who you're going to be working with are, clearer to you at that point. Okay. So just to wrap up, if you haven't already visited the ONSA website to make an appointment to check out resources like this Fulbright Friday presentation on our YouTube page, to contact us via Slack, you can do that. You can also specifically look at the our Fulbright site, which has frequently asked questions, videos, and this the corrected version of this timeline with the October 7th, the September 7th date for our internal deadline. And also, of course, the Fulbright US student site, where you can use their awards search tools to look and figure out, what country, what kind of Fulbright is right for you, what the different options and requirements are, what countries are looking for in Fulbright candidates. There's data, lots of data. There's lots of data that you could look at on the Fulbright US student site to help you figure out your next steps. Then your next steps, I mean, if you haven't already, would be to make an appointment for an intake meeting. We have a lot of availability. And, right now you've attended or watched the presentation for research and arts. But and then to make a meeting, you would select what type of meeting, what do you want to talk about? Are you looking to apply for research and arts, a graduate degree, or to be an English teaching assistant? But I think also keep an open mind, right? It might come out in this meeting through our discussion that, a different award is the right one for you. And that's part of the point of these meetings, to figure out what it is, you really want to prioritize for this. So go ahead and make that appointment. So thank you so much for your attention, and we hope to see you soon. This is the end of our presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
I will stop recording.